The Chicago studio of the Spotlight talk show blazed with artificial light, the kind that seemed to strip away every shadow and secret. The air buzzed with anticipation, the red audience seats filled with eager faces, their chatter barely drowned out by the upbeat theme music. Cameras glided across the set, their lenses like silent sentinels, and the stage gleamed under hot spotlights. At the center sat Whoopi Goldberg, a black woman with short black hair, her vibrant, light-colored suit catching the glow as her sharp smile sliced through the room. Across from her was Jonathan Roumie, a white man with shoulder-length, wavy brown hair, a short beard dressed in a black, open-collared shirt, a silver dog tag glinting faintly against his chest. His posture was relaxed yet tense, elbows on his thighs, eyes fixed on a point beyond the cameras, as if seeing something no one else could. The dog tag's small, scratch not new or flashy, swayed gently with each breath, a quiet anomaly under the studio's glare. It wasn't a prop, not a fashion statement, but something heavier like a whisper from a past life. The audience noticed their murmurs fading into a strange hush. Not silence exactly, but the kind of stillness that settles before something breaks open. The lights felt too bright, the air conditioning too cold, the cameras too watchful. Every detail in the room sharpened, as if the space itself was holding its breath, waiting for a moment that couldn't be undone. Whoopi, a veteran of live TV, sensed the undercurrent. Her smile widened, practiced and playful, aiming to cut through the tension. "All right, Jonathan," she said, glancing at the cameras with a teasing glint. "What's with the dog tag? You auditioning for some war flick? Looks like Rambo meets The Chosen." The audience chuckled, but the laughter was thin, hesitant, like they'd stepped into uncertain territory. Jonathan didn't laugh. He didn't flinch or smirk. Instead, he lowered his gaze, his hands slowly reaching for the tag fingers, closing around it. The gesture was small, but weighted a silent declaration. "This isn't a joke." The studio fell quiet. The laughter snuffed out. Whoopi's smile faltered for a split second, her eyes flicking to a figure offstage. Victor Hayes, a 45-year-old white man, with slick-back blonde hair, pale skin, dressed in a sharp navy suit, standing behind the cameras. His cold, calculating gaze met hers, and he nodded subtly through his earpiece, urging her to keep pushing, sensing a viral moment in the making. But Jonathan wasn't playing that game. He looked up, his eyes not angry or sad, but carrying a depth that seemed to pierce the room. "It's not a prop," he said, his voice low and steady. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through the studio. The co-host seated beside Whoopi froze. A murmur rippled through the audience. "What's happening?" The director signaled for a wide shot, trying to dilute the sudden gravity, but it was too late. The silence wasn't just awkward, it was electric, charged with unspoken stories. Hours before the show, in a dimly lit dressing room, Jonathan sat on a small leather couch, water bottle in one hand, his eyes on the dog tag. Its scratches caught the soft light, the engraved letters, a mystery only he understood. Across the room stood Lisa, his longtime friend and assistant, a 35-year-old white woman with brown hair tied in a high ponytail, wearing a green sweater and jeans. She scrolled through her phone, checking messages, but her gaze kept drifting to Jonathan. She knew him too well. His quiet wasn't just calm, it was a sign something was brewing. "You don't have to do this," she said, breaking the stillness. "This show, they love stirring things up." Jonathan exhaled, not looking up. "I said I'd do it." "But you didn't want to," Lisa countered, stepping closer. "They'll try to provoke you, Jonathan. You've been too private, and that makes them hungry. Or mean." He met her eyes, his gaze steady but distant. "I know, but it's time." He held up the tag, letting it dangle between his fingers. Lisa fell silent, understanding that the tag wasn't just metal, it was a piece of him, a story he rarely told. Back in the studio, the lights burned hotter, but Jonathan stayed composed. He sat center stage, hands folded, the dog tag faintly visible under his shirt. Whoopi, regaining her rhythm, leaned back with a playful edge. "Come on, Jonathan," she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "We've seen you as Jesus in The Chosen saving souls on screen. But this tag, is it your new Catholic chic line? Next up, rosaries for red carpets?" The audience laughed louder, the co-host joining in, sensing a chance to keep the energy light. Jonathan didn't respond right away. His jaw tightened slightly, his eyes unmoving. The silence stretched, thinning the laughter. Whoopi pushed further, her tone dropping into mock sincerity. Or what, you just can't let go of the past. The quip landed like a needle, not cruel, but sharp enough to sting. Jonathan finally looked up, his gaze not on Whoopi or the crowd, but somewhere beyond, as if seeing a memory. It's not a fashion statement, he said, his voice soft but firm. It's a promise. The studio went still. Seats creaked faintly. A cough echoed from the back. Victor offstage smirked, signaling the cameras to zoom in on Jonathan's face. He saw drama ratings a moment to exploit. Jonathan's fingers tightened around the tag. It belonged to someone, he said, his voice quieter now. Someone who didn't get to grow old. Someone who kept me going when I was young, when I had nothing. He paused, his eyes sweeping the audience, not as a performer, but as a witness. I wear it so I don't forget. Whoopi leaned back, her smile gone. She realized she'd crossed a line. The co-hosts sat frozen, one covering her mouth, another staring at the floor. The studio wasn't a talk show anymore. It was a raw living moment, and no one knew how to navigate it. Jonathan sat steady, his hand still on the tag, as if it anchored him in a storm. In his heart, he whispered a prayer. Lord, give me the strength to speak truth. He didn't know this was just the beginning, that Victor Hayes, with his greedy eyes, was already plotting to twist this moment for profit, and that a bigger battle lay ahead. The Chicago studio of the Spotlight was a frozen tableau, the air thick with the weight of Jonathan Roumie's words. I wear it so I don't forget. The dog tag, a scratched silver relic hanging from his black shirt, gleamed under the harsh stage lights, no longer a curiosity, but a symbol of something raw and real. Jonathan, a white man with shoulder-length, wavy brown hair and a short beard, sat center stage, his hand still resting on the tag, his eyes steady but distant. Across from him, Whoopi Goldberg, a black woman with short black hair dressed in a vibrant, light-colored suit, leaned back in her chair, her trademark smile replaced by a flicker of unease. The audience, packed into red seats, held their breath, their earlier laughter a distant memory. Offstage, Victor Hayes, a 45-year-old white man with slicked-back blonde hair, pale skin, and a sharp navy suit, watched with a predatory glint, whispering into his earpiece to keep the cameras tight on Jonathan's face. The silence stretched heavy and expectant, like the moment before a storm breaks. The co-hosts seated beside Whoopi shifted uncomfortably, their scripts forgotten. A camera operator hesitated, his lens lingering on Jonathan's hand, the tag catching the light like a beacon. Victor's smirk widened. He saw chaos, clicks a moment to exploit. But Jonathan wasn't here for ratings. He was here for truth, and the truth was heavier than any punchline. In his heart, he whispered a prayer. Lord, let my words heal, not harm. He thought of his own struggles, nights when he'd knelt in prayer, broken, unknown, doubting his path before the chosen. That faith steadied him now, guiding him through this uncharted moment. Whoopi broke the silence, her voice softer, less certain. Jonathan, she said, leaning forward, you said it's a promise. What? What does that mean? Her question wasn't a jab this time, but a genuine reach across the divide she'd unwittingly opened. Jonathan's gaze lifted, meeting hers, then sweeping the audience. It's a promise to remember, he said, his voice low but clear. The tag belonged to a friend, Sam. We were kids, barely 16, living in a shelter in New York. He was tough, funny, the kind of guy who'd give you his last dollar, but never admit he was hungry. He paused, his fingers tracing the tag's edges. Sam wore this tag, said it was his dad's from the army. It was all he had left of him. He gave it to me the night before he disappeared. The studio was still the only sound, a faint hum from the lights. A woman in the front row clutched her purse, her eyes wet. Jonathan continued, his voice steady but laced with pain. Sam didn't make it. I don't know if it was the streets, drugs, or something worse, but he saved me first, taught me to keep going, to believe I was worth something. This tag is my way of carrying him, of keeping my promise to live for both of us. The audience exhaled a collective release. A man in the back row wiped his eyes, his shoulders shaking. Whoopi's face softened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I didn't know, she said quietly, her voice cracking. I thought it was just a thing. Jonathan nodded, his expression gentle. It's okay. Most people don't see the weight we carry. I didn't either, for a long time. He glanced at the tag, then at the crowd. But hiding it doesn't make it lighter. Sharing it does. The words landed like a spark, igniting something in the room. A young woman, maybe 25, with long dark hair and a gray sweater, stood in the second row, her hands trembling. "My brother," she said, her voice breaking. "He died 2 years ago. Overdose. He was always smiling, so no one knew how bad it was." She looked at Jonathan, tears streaming. "You said you carry Sam. I carry my brother too. Every day." Jonathan's eyes met hers, warm and steady like a lifeline. "You're not alone," he said softly. The woman nodded, sitting down, her friend wrapping an arm around her. Another voice rose, an older man in a worn jacket. "My daughter," he said, his voice rough. "Car accident 10 years ago. I wear her ring on a chain, just like your tag. Never told anyone why till now." The stories came one by one like stones laid at an altar. A mother who lost her son to cancer. A veteran who carried his buddy's memory from Iraq. The studio, once a stage for laughs, became a sanctuary, each confession peeling back layers of hidden pain. Jonathan listened, his presence quiet but powerful, like the way he'd learned to embody Jesus on screen, not preaching, but witnessing. He thought of his own prayers, the nights he'd doubted his worth, and felt a surge of gratitude. "Lord, thank you for this moment." But not everyone saw sanctity. Victor Hayes, pacing behind the cameras, hissed into his earpiece. "Whoopi, stir it up," he urged, his voice sharp. "Ask him if he's playing the sympathy card. We need heat, not tears." Whoopi ignored him, her focus on Jonathan, but Victor's agitation grew. He signaled a stagehand to cue dramatic music, trying to wrest control of the moment, but the audience's raw honesty drowned it out. Whoopi leaned forward, her voice quieter now. "Jonathan, I owe you an apology. I thought I was being funny, but I didn't see this." She gestured to the crowd, to the tag. "I got a brother who passed too. Cancer. I don't talk about it. I laugh instead. Keeps the pain at bay." Jonathan's eyes softened. "We all do that sometimes," he said. "Laugh to survive. I've done it too. But tonight maybe we don't have to." His words, simple and true, seemed to shift the room's gravity, drawing everyone closer. Victor, undeterred, whispered to a co-producer, his navy suit catching the light as he moved. "This is too soft," he snapped. "We need conflict. Get someone in the audience to challenge him, say he's faking it for fame. Do it now." The co-producer hesitated, sensing the room's mood, but Victor's glare brooked no argument. He was betting on drama to spike ratings, uncaring of the cost. The stories kept coming, each one a thread, weaving the audience together. A teenage girl stood, her voice shaky. "My mom, she's sick. I'm scared she won't make it. I never told anyone till now." Jonathan nodded, his hand on the tag, his presence a quiet anchor. "You're brave for saying it," he said. "She's lucky to have you." The co-hosts, silent until now, were visibly moved. One, a woman in a red dress, dabbed her eyes. Another stared at the floor, his script crumpled in his hand. Offstage, Lisa, Jonathan's assistant, a 35-year-old white woman with brown hair and a high ponytail, wearing a green sweater and jeans, watched with a hand over her heart. She'd seen Jonathan's quiet strength before, but this was different. He was turning pain into connection, and it was changing the room. But Victor's shadow loomed. As another audience member stood to speak, a man in a black jacket rose abruptly, his voice loud and jarring. "This is all too convenient," he said, his tone accusatory. "You're a big star, Roumie. You sure this sob story isn't just for the cameras?" The room gasped, the fragile unity teetering. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed calm. He knew this wasn't organic. Victor's hand was behind it. Whoopi shot to her feet, her voice firm. "Hold on now. That's not how we do this." She glanced at Victor, her eyes narrowing, sensing his manipulation. The audience murmured some booing, the man others, looking to Jonathan, waiting for his response. Jonathan stood, his hand still on the tag, his voice steady. "I don't need to prove my pain," he said, looking at the man, then the crowd. "But if my story helps even one person feel less alone, it's worth it." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "That's why I'm here." The audience erupted in applause, drowning out the heckler. Victor's smirk faltered, his plan backfiring. But he wasn't done. He leaned into his earpiece, his voice cold. "We'll fix this in post. Get ready for phase 2. The stage lights flickered briefly, a technical glitch or a sign of something darker brewing. Jonathan sat back down, his heart heavy but resolute, knowing the fight was far from over. The Chicago studio of the Spotlight pulsed with raw energy, the applause for Jonathan Roumie fading into a charged hush. Jonathan, a white man with shoulder-length, wavy brown hair, and a short beard, dressed in a black, open-collared shirt with a silver dog tag glinting under the stage lights, sat center stage, his gaze steady but heavy. The heckler's accusation, "You sure this sob story isn't just for the camera?" still hung in the air. A calculated jab orchestrated by Victor Hayes, the 45-year-old white producer with slicked-back blonde hair, pale skin, and a sharp navy suit lurking off stage. Whoopi Goldberg, a black woman with short black hair, wearing a vibrant light-colored suit, stood with hands on her hips, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at Victor behind the cameras. The audience, packed into red seats, murmured their unity, tested but not broken. Jonathan's words, "If my story helps even one person feel less alone, it's worth it," had struck a chord, but the tension was far from over. Victor's smirk was gone, replaced by a scowl as his plan faltered. He whispered into his earpiece, his voice sharp, "Get another plant ready. We need to push him harder." The co-producer beside him, a nervous young man, hesitated, sensing the room's mood, but Victor's glare silenced any dissent. He was determined to twist this moment into chaos, ratings be damned. On stage, Jonathan sat composed, his hand resting on the dog tag, his heart whispering a prayer. "Lord, keep me grounded." He thought of his own journey, nights of doubt when playing Jesus in The Chosen, felt too big when he'd leaned on faith to carry him. That faith anchored him now amid the studio storm. Whoopi took charge, her voice firm but warm. "All right, let's keep this real," she said, addressing the crowd. "Jonathan's shared something deep, and we're not here to tear that down." She shot a pointed look at Victor, her instincts flaring. She'd worked with producers like him before, vultures who fed on conflict. The audience nodded, some clapping, but the heckler's words had sown a seed of doubt. A few glanced at Jonathan, wondering if there was truth to the claim. Before Whoopi could continue, another audience member stood, a woman in her 30s with straight blonde hair and a crisp blazer, her expression oddly polished. "I'm sorry, but I gotta say it." She began, her voice loud and rehearsed. "This feels like a PR stunt. You're a big star, Roumie, playing Jesus for millions. Convenient how you pull out this tag and get everyone crying. You sure you're not just milking the spotlight?" The crowd gasped, boos rising. The woman's delivery was too smooth, her eyes flicking to Victor for approval, betraying her as a plant. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed calm. He'd faced skepticism before, people questioning his faith, his motives, the weight of his role. He leaned forward, his voice steady. "I didn't come here to sell anything," he said, looking at the woman then the crowd. "I came because I'm tired of hiding pain. We all carry it, me, you, everyone here. If sharing mine makes someone feel seen, that's enough." He touched the tag, its scratches catching the light. "This isn't for fame. It's for Sam and for anyone who feels like giving up." The audience erupted, their applause drowning the woman's attempt to respond. She sat down, flustered, as Whoopi raised a hand to quiet the crowd. "Hold up," Whoopi said, her tone sharp. "I don't know who's feeding these lines, but this ain't the place for games." Her eyes locked on Victor, who froze, his earpiece crackling with static. The co-hosts exchanged glances, sensing the shift. Offstage, Lisa, Jonathan's assistant, a 35-year-old white woman with brown hair and a high ponytail, wearing a green sweater and jeans, clenched her fists, whispering to a stagehand, "That guy's trouble." The crowd's support emboldened others to stand. A man in his 50s with graying hair and a faded denim jacket spoke up, his voice trembling. "My son took his life last year," he said. "He was quiet like you said about Sam. I wish I'd asked him how he was really doing." He looked at Jonathan, tears in his eyes. "You're not faking. You're giving us permission to talk." A woman in a floral dress rose next. "My sister's fighting cancer," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been pretending I'm fine, but I'm not. Hearing you makes me feel less alone." Jonathan nodded, his eyes warm, his presence like a quiet harbor. He thought of his own prayers, the nights he'd wrestled with doubt, and felt a surge of purpose. "Lord, use me to lift them." His faith wasn't about preaching, it was about listening, being present, the way he'd learned through his Catholic roots. The stories poured out, each one a crack in the wall of silence. The studio, once a stage for quips, was now a sacred space, raw and unguarded. Whoopi, visibly moved, sat down, her hands clasped. "I didn't expect this," she admitted, her voice low. "Jonathan, you've turned this show into something else." Jonathan shook his head, humble. "It's not me. It's all of us being honest." He glanced at the tag, then the crowd. "Pain's heavy, but we don't have to carry it alone." Victor's frustration boiled over. He hissed into his earpiece, "This is a disaster. Get me something to flip this now." But his control was slipping. The audience's unity was stronger than his schemes, and Whoopi's growing suspicion threatened to expose him. She leaned toward a co-host, whispering, "Keep an eye on Hayes. Something's off." Then the studio monitors flickered, drawing every eye. A message appeared, sent live from a viewer at home. "I was going to end my life tonight, but I'm still here because of this." "Thank you, Jonathan." The room gasped, a reverent silence falling. Jonathan's breath caught his hand tightening on the tag. He closed his eyes, whispering a prayer. "Lord, thank you for this life." He thought of Sam, of his own dark nights, and felt tears prick his eyes. Whoopi stood, her voice thick. That's real," she said, looking at Jonathan. "You did that." The audience was still, some crying, others holding hands. The co-hosts, shaken, stayed silent, their scripts long forgotten. Lisa, off stage, wiped her eyes, pride swelling for her friend. The studio wasn't a talk show anymore. It was a lifeline, a moment that transcended the cameras. But Victor wasn't done. He stormed to a control booth, his navy suit catching the dim backstage light. "Cut the feed," he snapped to a technician. "We need to spin this, say, Roumie planned it for sympathy." The technician hesitated, glancing at the monitor's message. But Victor's glare pushed him to comply. The lights flickered again, a glitch that sent a chill through the room. Whoopi noticed, her eyes narrowing further. She whispered to a stagehand, "Find out what Hayes is doing." On stage, Jonathan stood, his voice gentle but firm. "Whoever sent that message," he said, looking at the cameras, "you're not alone. Keep fighting. We're here with you." The audience applauded, their voices rising in support. But the flickering lights and Victor's shadowed movements hinted at a storm brewing. Jonathan sat down, his hand on the tag, his heart heavy with gratitude, but alert to the tension. Victor's next move was coming, and it would test everything, faith, truth, in the fragile unity of this moment. The Chicago studio of the Spotlight was no longer a stage for entertainment. It was a sanctuary, transformed by the raw honesty sparked by Jonathan Roumie's words. Jonathan, a white man with shoulder-length, wavy brown hair and a short beard, dressed in a black open-collared shirt with a silver dog tag glinting under the stage lights, stood center stage, his eyes warm but resolute. The audience, packed into red seats, was still reeling from the viewer's message on the studio monitors. "I was going to end my life tonight, but I'm still here because of this." The words hung like a sacred vow, binding the room in a shared reverence. Whoopi Goldberg, a black woman with short black hair, wearing a vibrant light-colored suit, stood beside Jonathan, her usual confidence softened by emotion. Offstage, Victor Hayes, a 45-year-old white man with slicked-back blonde hair, pale skin, and a sharp navy suit, paced in the control booth, his face twisted with frustration as his plan to derail the show unraveled. The flickering lights, a glitch from Victor's attempt to cut the feed, had settled, but the tension hadn't. Whoopi's eyes darted to the booth where Victor's silhouette loomed behind glass. She'd caught his whispered orders, his push for drama, and her instincts screamed he was trouble. The audience, unaware of the backstage scheming, leaned forward, some wiping tears, others holding hands. Jonathan's voice still echoed in their minds. "You're not alone." He sat down now, his hand resting on the dog tag, his heart whispering a prayer. "Lord, let this moment hold." He thought of his own nights of doubt, when he'd nearly quit acting, when the weight of playing Jesus in The Chosen felt crushing and felt a surge of purpose. His faith wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, and tonight he was here for them. Whoopi took a breath, her voice steady but raw. "Jonathan, you've done something tonight," she said, looking at him. Then the crowd. "This isn't just a show anymore. It's something bigger." She paused, her eyes glistening. "I'm sorry again for that dumb joke. I didn't know what that tag meant." Jonathan shook his head, his smile gentle. "You didn't know because I didn't share. But now we're all sharing, and that's what matters. He looked out at the audience, his presence calm but powerful, like a shepherd guiding a flock through a storm. Keep talking. Your stories, they're saving someone right now. The crowd responded, more voices rising. A woman in her 40s with curly red hair and a gray scarf stood, her voice trembling. My husband left after our son died, she said. I've been pretending I'm okay, but I'm not. Hearing you all makes me feel like I can breathe again. A young man in a hoodie, his eyes red, spoke next. I lost my best friend to a car crash. I blame myself for years. Tonight's the first time I've said it out loud. Each story was a thread weaving the room into a tapestry of shared pain and hope. Offstage, Lisa, Jonathan's assistant, a 35-year-old white woman with brown hair and a high ponytail, wearing a green sweater and jeans, watched with pride but growing unease. She'd seen Victor's agitated pacing, his hissed orders to the crew. Slipping into the control booth, she overheard him on his phone, his voice low and venomous. If this sob fest doesn't tank the ratings, we'll make sure Roumie does, he said. Leak a story tomorrow, say he staged this for sympathy. I've got a reporter ready. Lisa's heart sank. Victor wasn't just manipulating the show, he was planning to destroy Jonathan's reputation. She pulled a stagehand aside, a young woman named Tara, and whispered, keep an eye on Hayes. Record anything he says. Tara nodded, slipping her phone into her pocket, her eyes sharp. Lisa knew Victor's type, men who saw people as pawns, not souls. She thought of Jonathan's quiet faith, the way he'd pray before tough scenes on The Chosen, and felt a fire ignite. She wouldn't let Victor win. On stage, the stories continued, but Victor's next move came swiftly. He signaled a new plan in the audience, a man in his 30s with a buzz cut and a leather jacket who stood with forced indignation. This is ridiculous, he barked, his voice cutting through the tenderness. Roumie's turning this into a therapy session for clout. You're all falling for it. The crowd booed, their unity tightening, but the accusation stung. A few glanced at Jonathan, doubt flickering. Whoopi shot up, her voice like steel. Enough, she snapped, glaring at the man, then at Victor's booth. I don't know who's putting you up to this, but we're done with games. She turned to Jonathan, her expression apologetic. Go on, Jonathan. We're listening. Jonathan stood, his hand on the tag, his voice calm but unwavering. I don't need everyone to believe me, he said, looking at the plant, then the crowd. I just need one person to feel less alone. If that's you, this is enough. His words, rooted in the humility he'd learned through years of prayer, silenced the heckler. The crowd cheered, their voices a wall against Victor's schemes. Lisa in the booth caught Tara's eye. The stagehand held up her phone, nodding she'd recorded Victor's call. Lisa's pulse quickened. This was the evidence they needed, but they had to act fast. She slipped backstage, finding Whoopi's assistant and whispering, tell Whoopi to check her messages. We've got something on Hayes. Whoopi, mid-show, glanced at her phone during a brief pause, her face hardening as she read Lisa's text. Victor's planning to smear Jonathan. We have proof. Victor, oblivious, pushed further. He leaned into the control booth's mic, his voice sharp. Dim the lights again. Make it look like a glitch. We'll say Roumie's team sabotaged the show. The technician hesitated, but Victor's glare forced compliance. The lights flickered, plunging the stage into a brief, eerie half-darkness. The audience gasped, the monitors stuttering. Whoopi's eyes snapped to the booth, her suspicion, now certainty. She signaled a stagehand to lock the booth's door, trapping Victor inside. On stage, Jonathan sensed the shift, but stayed focused. He spoke to the crowd, his voice gentle. We all carry something, grief, shame, fear, but we're not meant to carry it alone. Tonight you've shown me that. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. Thank you for trusting me with your stories. The crowd stood, some clapping, others crying their unity, a force Victor couldn't break. Whoopi stepped forward, her voice raw. Jonathan, you've made this place a church tonight, she said, half laughing, half serious. But someone's trying to tear it down. She glanced at the booth where Victor's silhouette froze behind the glass. We're not letting that happen. Lisa rushed to Whoopi's side, slipping her the phone with Tara's recording. Whoopi listened for a moment, her face tightening with anger. She whispered to Jonathan, Hayes is behind this. He's trying to ruin you. Jonathan's eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed calm. Let him try. Truth's stronger than lies. The lights flickered again, Victor's last desperate move. The audience murmured, sensing trouble, but their trust in Jonathan held firm. A young woman in the front row stood, her voice clear. "I was afraid to come tonight," she said. "But you, Jonathan, you made me feel brave." The crowd roared, drowning out the glitch. Victor's plan was crumbling, and Whoopi's glare promised he'd pay. Jonathan touched the tag, whispering a prayer. "Lord, let truth win." The stage lights steadied, but the real battle was just beginning, and Victor's reckoning was closer than he knew. The Chicago studio of the Spotlight thrummed with a sacred energy, the audience's voices still ringing from their stand for Jonathan Roumie. Jonathan, a white man with shoulder-length, wavy brown hair, and a short beard, dressed in a black, open-collared shirt with a silver dog tag glinting under the stage lights, stood center stage, his hand resting on the tag, his eyes warm with gratitude. The crowd, packed into red seats, was a tapestry of shared stories, grief, hope, and courage, woven together by Jonathan's honesty. Whoopi Goldberg, a black woman with short black hair wearing a vibrant light-colored suit, stood beside him, her face set with determination as she clutched Lisa's phone, its recording of Victor Hayes' schemes burning in her hand. Offstage, Victor, a 45-year-old white man with slick-back blonde hair, pale skin, and a sharp navy suit, was trapped in the control booth, his silhouette rigid behind locked glass. The flickering lights, his last attempt to sabotage the show, had steadied, but his reckoning was coming. The audience's roar faded into an expectant hush, sensing the tension. Whoopi's glare pierced the booth, where Victor's frantic whispers into his earpiece went unanswered. Jonathan's words, "We're not meant to carry it alone," had turned the studio into a sanctuary, a place where pain was shared, not hidden. But Victor's shadow threatened to shatter it. Lisa, Jonathan's assistant, a 35-year-old white woman with brown hair and a high ponytail, wearing a green sweater and jeans, stood backstage, her eyes fierce. She'd handed Whoopi the proof, a recording of Victor ordering a smear campaign against Jonathan, planning to leak lies about a staged sob story. The stagehand Tara, a young woman with short black hair, hovered nearby, her phone, holding a backup of the damning call. Jonathan sat down, his hand on the tag, whispering a prayer. "Lord, let truth prevail." He thought of his own journey, empty bank accounts, nights praying through despair, the weight of playing Jesus in The Chosen, and felt a quiet strength. His faith wasn't about triumph, it was about endurance, and tonight he'd endured for others. The audience watched him, their trust a shield against Victor's lies. Whoopi stepped forward, her voice like thunder. "Folks, we've had a real moment tonight," she said, holding up the phone. "But someone's been trying to turn it into a circus." The crowd murmured, sensing trouble. She turned to the booth, her eyes locked on Victor. "Victor Hayes, our producer, thought he could twist this for ratings. He planted people to attack Jonathan, tried to cut our feed, and planned to lie about this man's heart." She paused, her voice dropping. "But we've got proof." The audience gasped, boos rising. Victor's face paled behind the glass, his hand slamming the booth's door, but it held firm. Lisa nodded to Tara, who slipped backstage to alert security. Whoopi played the recording through the studio speakers, Victor's voice cold and clear. "Leak a story tomorrow, say Roumie staged this for sympathy." The crowd roared their anger, a tidal wave. A woman in the front row shouted, "Get him out!" Others joined, chanting Jonathan's name. Jonathan raised a hand, his voice gentle but firm. "Wait," he said, standing. "This isn't about him. It's about us, about the stories we've shared, the lives we've touched." He looked at the crowd, his eyes steady. "That message from someone at home saying they're still here, that's why we're here. Don't let anger steal that." The audience quieted, moved by his grace. Whoopi nodded, her respect deepening. "You're right, Jonathan," she said. "But this man's got to face what he's done." She signaled security, who stormed the booth, dragging Victor out. His navy suit was rumpled, his face a mask of panic as he shouted, "This is a mistake." The crowd booed, but Jonathan's calm presence kept them grounded. Backstage, Lisa handed Whoopi a folder emails from Victor to a tabloid promising dirt on Jonathan for cash. Whoopi held it up, her voice fierce. "This is who he is," she said, projecting the emails on the monitors. "He bribed audience members, lied to our crew, and tried to ruin a man who's given us truth." The crowd erupted, their outrage fueled by betrayal. The co-hosts, shaken, stood in solidarity, one whispering, "I had no idea." Victor, now center stage, faced Whoopi's glare. "You're done, Hayes," she said. "You're fired, and this goes to the network." Security hauled him off his protest, drowned by the crowd's cheers. The news spread instantly. Live feeds captured the confrontation, and within hours headlines blazed, "Producer fired for sabotaging viral talk show moment." Victor's career collapsed, tabloids turned on him, and industry insiders blacklisted him, his greed, his own undoing. His public disgrace was swift and total, a punishment that satisfied the audience's hunger for justice. On stage, the show resumed, but it wasn't a show anymore. Jonathan spoke to the crowd, his voice soft. "Tonight you showed me what courage looks like," he said. "You shared your pain, your hope. That's strength." He touched the tag, his eyes glistening. Sam would have been proud of this room. A young man in the audience stood, his voice clear. "You saved someone tonight, Jonathan. You saved me too." Others nodded, some crying, others clapping. Whoopi stepped beside Jonathan, her voice raw. "I've been doing this a long time," she said. "But tonight's different. You made it different." Jonathan shook his head, humble. "It's not just me. It's all of us and something bigger." He glanced at the tag, then the monitors where a new message appeared. "Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone." The crowd gasped, their unity sealed. Jonathan whispered a final prayer. "Lord, thank you for them." As the show ended, Jonathan placed the dog tag on the table, a quiet offering. The cameras lingered on it, its scratches catching the light. Whoopi stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "You carried that tag for Sam," she said softly. "Now you've carried us too." The monitors faded to black, a final message appearing. "Strength isn't loud. It endures." No music played, no credits rolled, just the tag alone on the table, a symbol of shared survival. In homes across the world, viewers sat in silence, some crying, others holding loved ones, their hearts cracked open by a single moment of truth. Victor's downfall was news, but Jonathan's compassion was the story that lingered, a beacon for those carrying pain. Jonathan stepped off stage, Lisa at his side, her eyes proud. "You did it," she whispered. He smiled, weary but fulfilled. "We did it," he said, glancing back at the crowd still standing, still connected. The tag was lighter now, not because the pain was gone, but because it was shared. In Chicago's cold night, the studio's glow reached far beyond its walls, a legacy of faith, truth, and the courage to keep going.